When a serious crime is committed and the police need all the help they can get, there's one group of people they turn to time after time: the expert witnesses.
An expert witness is critical because they're going to have that deep level knowledge to really determine if something stands out that doesn't look quite right.
An extraordinary army of men and women with the expertise to reveal the hidden clues criminals have left behind.
My brain just sort of exploded with different ideas. Even a single-celled organism can solve a crime.
They search harder and look deeper, using the very latest techniques.
They're constantly evolving, constantly improving. It's soon going to become impossible to get away with murder.
This is the inside story of how science helps solve some of the UK's most complex cases.
That was one of my eureka moments in all my 30 years of forensic examination.
The chances of finding something were really incredibly slim. That tiny possibility had to be explored.
I've seen people talk about justice being done, but no matter what kind of punishment he faced, it would never be enough.
This is the story of the expert witness. In this show, we're in Greater Manchester to find out how two forensic experts help catch the killer of a single mum.
There was a very high likelihood that he'd been to that place and picked up the trace evidence from that place.
And we go to a historical site in Cheshire to reveal how a soil specialist tackled an unusual case of illegal treasure hunters.
My brain just sort of exploded with all the different ideas that we could use to support heritage crime.
They do say that a picture tells 1,000 words. Most of my work is comparing injuries to a particular weapon. Basically, I match wounds to weapons.
I look at just about every natural thing that you can think of at a crime scene and how they are picked up by offenders at crime scenes.
April 2002. Downward, outside Denton in Greater Manchester. Police launch a murder investigation after the body of a woman is found by a dog walker. Leading the team was Senior Investigating Officer, Detective Chief Inspector Tony Cook.
The people who she knew personally, we need those people to come forward because they might have some vital information on her lifestyle and what she was doing just prior to her murder.
20 years later, Tony can remember clearly the details of this shocking crime.
So this is where it happened. She was partially clothed, not far away from the body. The contents of a handbag had been tipped out. A jacket was next to the contents of the handbag, and this is where she was discovered and where we started the commencement of the investigation.
The victim was Karen Doubleday, a 41-year-old single mother of a teenage son who lived nearby with her parents.
Today, the mother of Karen Doubleday said she can't imagine going on without her daughter.
Life's just gone. It's like being in a nightmare, and we're just not coming out of it. I just don't know what to do.
Karen has been murdered. She worked in the local community at a greengrocer's. She was well known, really bubbly, vivacious type of personality. Everybody liked her, and when we were looking as to why she'd been murdered, obviously we're looking for things that might be happening in her life at that time that might give somebody a motive to murder her. We quickly established she'd been strangled using her own bra as a makeshift tourniquet, and she had about 6 or 7 stamps or punch marks to her face.
Police carried out a forensic examination of the scene, but found no evidence of Karen's killer. Detectives turned instead to the last person to see her alive, boyfriend Adam Hamilton.
When we brought Adam Hamilton in for questioning, his explanation was that he'd been very drunk. Karen had left his flat at about 1:15 a.m. He tried to follow her on a little bit, but then realised he was too drunk to walk, so he'd gone back home. And then he'd woken up the next day and he was still too drunk to do anything. There were certain things about him that weren't stacking up. We found out that he'd been seeing somebody else. They were in a stormy relationship. Karen was also seeing somebody else. He'd also been involved in some previous violence against a female. And when we searched his flat, Karen's phone was found in that flat. So she had two phones, her own phone and one he'd given her. And he used to phone her multiple times every day, which indicates the level of control he had on it.
Tony was quickly suspicious of Hamilton, and investigators uncovered further inconsistencies concerning his whereabouts on the night of the murder.
He said he'd never been out of his flat. Actually, we found him on CCTV in the early hours of the morning. He said that he hadn't been out that morning, and we had members of the public who'd seen him out and about that morning. So his excuses that he gave to us just never stacked up at all. And most importantly, when Karen hadn't returned home, her mother, obviously concerned about where she was, had phoned him, and he said he hadn't seen her. And after that point, he never phoned her. He never tried to find out where she was. He never went out looking for her. So it was all indicating that this man was probably involved in the murder. But we just didn't have enough evidence to charge him.
Tony had no choice but to release Hamilton on bail, but not without seizing a number of items from the suspect's flat. Tony hoped these might hold evidence to link him to the murder.
One of the things we took off him was a pair of jeans with a very interesting soil or dirt mark on the knee, and we knew the offender had been knelt down on the floor behind Karen in order to strangle her. And we took his footwear because we were trying to link him to the crime scene. That was what we were missing.
To find this evidence and crack the case, Tony needed the help of an expert witness. He turned to Patricia Wiltshire, a forensic ecologist and world authority in pollen analysis.
Every little place is unique. Now, you can get two samples a metre apart, and they'll be similar, but they won't be identical. And the further away you are from that crime scene, the more and more and more different it gets. Where she was found was surrounded by bramble bushes. I took samples from the ground, and lo and behold, there was quite a lot of pollen from bramble there. There were other plants as well. There were other pollen types as well. So by the time I'd finished analysing those samples, I had a good palynological picture of that place.
This palynological picture or profile showed the unique combination of pollen and plant spores found at the crime scene.
The question then is, can I retrieve that profile, or as close as possible to that profile, from the suspect?
Professor Wiltshire now compared the pollen profile from the scene of the crime to pollen from the mud stain on Hamilton's trousers.
I was able to extract from those a palynological profile, and lo and behold, it was very similar, very, very similar to the crime scene. For me, there was a very high likelihood that he'd been to that place and picked up the trace evidence from that place.
Patricia Wiltshire's evidence was key. It was key because it put Adam Hamilton to the scene of the crime. He denied ever being at that scene, and it blew his alibi and his defence out of the water completely. It was really key to the case.
But Tony had a problem. The Pollen showed Adam Hamilton was at the crime scene, but it did not prove he murdered Karen. For that, Tony needed the help of another expert witness.
We had this mark on Karen's face, which we wanted to have examined. So we approached Derek Tremaine, who worked for the National Injuries Database, to see if he could link the mark on the face to our suspect's footwear.
Basically, I match wounds to weapons to show that that weapon may have made that mark.
Derek studied the photographs of the distinctive mark on Karen's face and straight away had a hunch as to what made it.
A bucket-shaped mark, so it had a flat bottom and then two angles going off. To me, it looked like a footwear mark.
If Derek could prove that one of Adam Hamilton's shoes had caused that injury to Karen's face, the police would have enough evidence to charge him.
They sent me down the shoes they had recovered from the suspect's home. There was one particular shoe that had this inverted bucket shapes on it.
But there was a problem. The crime scene images did not contain a scale ruler to indicate the size of the mark. So Derek could not prove beyond reasonable doubt that it was Hamilton's shoe that caused the injury.
We had the shape, but we didn't have the size. And of course, any defence barrister of any sort would pick up on that and say, well, you made it fit. So that's why scales are so important, so we can make sure that the injury and the weapon are exactly the same size.
Derek needed to find some way to prove that the shoe pattern was exactly the same size as the injury to Karen's face. In the crime scene photographs, he'd noticed a necklace around Karen's neck.
It was a sort of a fine chain with a heart-shaped pendant on it. So with a bit of lateral thinking, I thought perhaps I can match the chain to get a scale on the picture.
Derek asked the police to photograph the chain with an evidential scale ruler so that he could accurately tell the size of the chain.
I could blow the picture up, superimpose the links of the chain, and then I could work to size the shoe to make it the same size.
With the size of the links in Karen's necklace as a guide, Derek next worked out the size of the bucket-patterned mark on Karen's face and compared it to Hamilton's shoe.
I could then use the scale on the shoes and make them both the same size. And when they were both the same size, I could see that the bucket-shaped mark matched that area of the heel.
Derek's evidence was now watertight. He could now prove that the pattern on Alan Hamilton's shoe exactly matched the injury on Karen's face.
I went back to Tony Cook, the SIO, and I said, look, I found a match, and of course they were ecstatic.
Derek Tremaine was able to make a match between our suspect's footwear and that mark on the face, a crucial piece of evidence which linked him to the attack on Karen. It was really strong supportive evidence.
In February 2004, Adam Hamilton stood trial for the murder of his girlfriend, Karen Doubleday. Central to the prosecution was evidence from two expert witnesses, Patricia Wiltshire and Derek Tremaine.
It was really important that Pat Wiltshire was able to link Adam Hamilton to that crime scene. It was crucial evidence. And also supporting that evidence was the evidence we had from our expert Derek Tremaine, who was able to link his footwear to that mark on Karen's face.
A man who strangled his girlfriend and left her body in woods near her home in Tameside has been jailed for life. Manchester Crown Court was told unique plant spores from the scene of the crime were found on the clothes of 37-year-old Adam Hamilton. He was found guilty of murder.
When the jury came back after deliberating for 5 or 6 hours with a guilty verdict, it's a huge relief for the family, for Joan and Jim Doubleday, Karen's parents, and for all the investigation team, for all the experts, everybody involved in that case. It was a huge relief that we'd managed to prove our case, and it was a unanimous verdict too.
Hamilton was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years before being considered for parole. After the trial, Karen's parents personally thanked Derek Tremaine outside the court.
It is nice when you hear the outcome that it's gone well. It's very important that the family gets closure, really.
Heritage crime doesn't necessarily leave the standard types of trace evidence that police forces are used to dealing with. We can use forensic ecology to support new areas of investigations, such as heritage crime.
This is Beeston Castle in Cheshire. The castle has been here for hundreds of years, but there's been a settlement on this site for many thousands, dating back beyond the Bronze Age. Wim Scott is properties curator at English Heritage.
Pretty well all of the sites we look after at English Heritage are scheduled monuments, so they're nationally protected sites. These are the cream of Britain's heritage that we have to protect. What's below us in the ground are incredible libraries of information. And if we don't record that information in the ground with incredible precision, it's lost forever.
December 2019, and a gang of treasure hunters, often referred to as Nighthawks, break into the grounds of Beeston Castle. Using high-powered metal detectors, they locate an unknown number of objects. They dig them up and illegally remove them from this protected site.
I got a call from the site manager who said that I've come in this morning and right across the site there are holes dug, about 100 of them. And it was really distressing. It's like someone coming into your house and burning your family photographs. And I think what a lot of people, treasure hunters, don't realise is that how much information they are destroying as they reach down into the soil to pull something out.
Local police in Cheshire had recently completed a new training programme focused on exactly this type of heritage crime. In charge of that programme was Head of Historic Crime Strategy at Historic England and former senior police officer Mark Harrison.
Cheshire Police had only just done their training. So when the call came in to say we're investigating an incident at Beeston Castle, they were right on message.
Police examined the scene for any evidence that could tell them who may have been responsible for this heritage crime, but they found no clues.
These were criminals that had come onto the site in the dead of night, digging into an important, protected site. So we had no idea what they'd taken. But when we spoke to staff at English Heritage, there's been occupation on that site since the Bronze Age. So there was a really good chance that objects from the Bronze Age had been taken.
Police trawled through hours of CCTV of the night in question and managed to get a partial hit on a registration plate. This gave them the name of their first suspect.
They had some intelligence. I think they had a partial registration number, and they moved quickly.
One of the first suspects the police identified was Francis Ward, who was linked to a gang of Nighthawks from Tameside in Greater Manchester.
Just after Christmas, the police had a lead, which was absolutely wonderful to hear that.
As police looked into the activities of the gang, they had a stroke of luck. They received a tip-off from an antiques dealer. He told them that someone had offered him a number of Bronze Age axe heads for sale.
As time went on, we realised that it was probably Beeston Castle they had taken the objects from. How on earth do you prove that?
Without conclusive proof linking the axe heads to the site at Beeston Castle, the police knew they wouldn't have a strong enough case to bring to court. Police obtained warrants to search the homes of the five-man gang they suspected of having stolen the artefacts. The raids were filmed by the police. During the raids, the police found dozens of artefacts that had potentially been taken from Beeston Castle. They photographed the objects they'd found, including a number of axe heads. But the gang denied they'd taken them from Beeston Castle.
These axes are called socketed axes. They belong in the late Bronze Age. They are incredibly sophisticated pieces of, I was going to say, engineering, technology. When you pick up something that's 3,000 years old and you realise how cleverly it's been made, they are beautiful and they are worth quite a bit of money.
The fact that it looked like an axe that came from the Cheshire, the Beeston area, that wasn't enough for us. We needed to get more evidence, more proof to make that direct link that that axe had come from Beeston. We needed to find that evidence and bring this case home.
Mark and his team enlisted the help of forensic ecologist Dr. Rosie Everett, who's an expert in soil analysis. Could she find the definitive link between the axe heads and Beeston Castle?
So when I was contacted by Historic England to ask how we could support the latest case of illegal metal detection in the UK, my brain just sort of exploded with all the different ideas that we could use within the principles of forensic ecology to support heritage crime.
One of the forensic tools that Rosie uses in her lab is soil analysis.
We could look at the soils from Beeston Castle and characterise them. So what do they look like under the microscope? What are the potential trace evidence types, things like soils and pollen? And also, if there's any soils associated with the Bronze Age axe heads, whether we can compare them and say, yes, these Bronze Age axe heads have been taken from Beeston Castle. But what we were really lucky with is these were what we call socketed Bronze Age axe heads. So you've got the axe head, but you've also got the bit in which the stick fits into the axe head. And what that creates is a big void. And luckily for us, all of the soils that had been growing up around this Bronze Age axe head had stuck and lodged themselves into that void.
Rosie analysed the soil samples that she'd taken from the site at Beeston Castle and compared them to the traces of soil that she'd found inside the Bronze Age axe heads recovered in the police raids.
So this is a typical view of what you'll see if you take some soil and put it under the microscope. What we've got here is a whole range of different elements of the soil that we'd use to characterise the soil. So for example, you've got these quartz-based structures that we would measure, we would colorise. We've also got here what we call kind of organic matter. And what we would do is we would look at that relationship between the amount of organic matter and the amount of inorganic matter to look at the soil composition. So I've looked at soil A from Beeston Castle. I've then looked at soil B from the Bronze Age axe heads. And in my expert opinion, there is a 95% chance that they had the same provenance.
Rosie prepared a report, and it was quite clear that there was good linkage to the site, but linked to the other evidence that the police had gathered, it made the case complete.
It was so important to be able to prove where this came from. And it's the soil science, the forensic science in this particular case, that clinched the case.
In December 2019, police charged Curtis Barlow, Gary Flanagan, Daniel James Lloyd, Andrew Lawn, and Francis James Ward with night hawking and criminal behaviour. And as they told police during their interviews, they all denied taking the axe heads from Beeston Castle.
So the suspects at first said, no, we didn't find it there, right, at Beeston Castle, fine. But we could prove, once they knew we could prove it, they admitted and pleaded guilty.
Presented with Rosie's conclusive findings, the gang admitted their guilt in what's believed to be the first ever heritage crime in the UK to include this type of expert witness evidence.
Heritage crime doesn't necessarily get the time and effort that other areas do. So to be able to support that, it's a fantastic opportunity.
On the 7th of May 2021, at Chester Magistrates Court, all members of the gang were convicted and sentenced for night hawking. They were all given criminal behaviour orders, barring them from metal detecting at any heritage sites in England and Wales. The men also had to forfeit all the stolen artefacts and their metal detectors.
So it's the soil science that really clinched it. Absolutely wonderful.
Now we consider soil analysis on all of our cases relating to night hawking to keep us one step ahead of the criminals that are minded to steal our past.